I cut the brakes this morning, Mark whispered with a calm smile, his hand resting on the cherry red hood of the car. When she crashes, it'll all be over. The money, the house, our future, all ours. Without her. Vanessa let out a nervous giggle, her hands trembling inside her nurse's scrubs. Her messy bun was pulled tight, but nothing could hold back the storm in her eyes. She was beautiful, full lips, eyes like fire, and a soul so hollow that not even 1,000 night shifts at the hospital could fill it. She bit her nails as she stared at the car. What if? She began. She won't survive, Mark said with unwavering confidence, the kind only men who believe they own the world possess. It's done. There's no going back. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her hard. It wasn't love. It was tension, greed, and desperation. On the other side of town, Grace stood in her kitchen. She was completely unaware that her death had already been signed and sealed, not in ink, but in betrayal. She tucked her peach-colored blouse into a dainty apron with little daisies on it, a Mother's Day gift from her son Ethan. The scent of coffee drifted through the air, and soft country music played on the radio, just like always. Mom. Grandma Margaret's here. Ethan shouted from the backyard. Grace wiped her hands and headed to the front door. There stood Mark's mother, Margaret, wrapped in her usual gray shawl, coughing with each breath as if her soul were being chipped away. Her hands were swollen, her eyes exhausted, her body, a map of years of silent suffering. I need a favor, sweetheart, she said between coughs, her smile gentle. There's a new healer at the church in San Mateo. They say her hands are blessed by God. Could I borrow your car? Just for today. Grace hesitated. Something tightened in her chest, like the air before a storm. But she smiled and replied. Of course. Let me take Ethan to school first. I'll fill the tank before I give you the keys. Margaret placed her hand gently on Grace's arm, whispering a quiet blessing like a protective charm. 10:01 a.m. The Miller household's landline rang. Grace answered it while rinsing dishes. Hello? Is this Grace Miller? A panicked voice asked. Yes, who's this? This is the Red Cross. Your car has been involved in a serious accident. The victim is Margaret Miller. The words froze in the air. She didn't need to hear anything else. The phone slipped from her hand. She ran to the bedroom. Ethan was napping. She held him. There was no time to cry. Not yet. She called Mark. He answered in 5 seconds. What is it? I'm busy. Your mom was in an accident. In the car. Silence. Not the kind that follows a collision, the kind that precedes total collapse. Mark's hand froze on the desk. It wasn't grief that gripped him. It was fear. The car? What do you mean? Why was Mom driving? She asked me. Said she was going to see a healer at the church, so I lent it to her. Grace's voice trembled. Mark said nothing. No curses. No sighs. Just silence. Then the line disconnected. He leaned back in his chair. Sweat beaded at his temples. The perfect plan had claimed the wrong victim. And the worst part wasn't death itself, but the fact that an innocent mother had paid the price. Margaret's body was found at the bottom of a ravine. She was pinned inside the twisted wreck of Grace's cherry red car. The brakes were gone. No skid marks. Only a scream. And then, silence. At the hospital, her body was covered in a white sheet, but her feet stuck out. Feet hardened by a lifetime of walking through hardship rather than resting. I can't believe this. Grace sobbed, clutching the cold bed rail. Mark didn't appear until nearly an hour later. His shirt was wrinkled. There wasn't a trace of tears on his face. He knelt beside his mother's body, gritting his teeth as he gently touched her forehead. The gesture burned with tender pain. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It wasn't supposed to be you." Grace saw it and thought the trembling in his shoulders came from sorrow. But it wasn't sorrow. It was guilt. Ethan came into the room with red eyes. He was clutching a drawing in his small hands. He had drawn his grandma Margaret in the sky, with large wings and a bright, beaming smile. "Where is Grandma now?" he asked. Grace pulled him into a tight hug. "She's with God, baby. She's somewhere where she doesn't cough anymore, where nothing hurts." The week of the funeral was a fog of awkward visits, empty casserole dishes, and words that had no place. Grace stood like a pillar, receiving condolences. Mark drowned himself in alcohol. Vanessa disappeared. No one noticed that the light in Grace's eyes had gone out. The night before the burial, Grace wandered into the garage. She sat in the driver's seat of the car and closed her eyes. She imagined herself falling. She heard Ethan screaming. The brakes didn't work. Her stomach twisted into knots. She got out of the car and knelt beside it, her heart pounding. She didn't know anything about cars, but something felt wrong. A hose was dangling. A bolt looked so loose it was ready to fall off. She called Jake, her brother-in-law, who worked part-time as a mechanic. "Can you check the brakes tomorrow?" She didn't say more. She didn't need to. 2 days later, Jake called back. His voice was shaking. "Grace, it was cut. The brake line. This wasn't an accident." In that moment, her soul split in two. She didn't faint. She didn't scream. She stared at the living room. There was Ethan, sitting on the floor, playing with his toy car. "Thank you, Jake," she said quietly. "But don't tell anyone." Not yet. That night, she couldn't sleep. The next night either. One scene kept playing in her mind. Mark and Vanessa. Whispering. Laughing. And then, she remembered. A few days before the crash, she had seen a shadow move outside the backyard. She thought it was a stray dog at the time. But that morning, the security light had gone off. She went to the home security room. Mark had installed cameras a few months earlier, for the family's safety. She rewound the footage. There. A figure crouched by the car. She heard a voice. She turned up the volume. "Once she crashes, we'll be free. We'll finally have the life we deserve." It was Mark's voice. Then came Vanessa's laugh. The room felt like it vanished. She collapsed onto the floor. Her hands trembled. Oh my goodness. They hadn't tried to erase just her. What if Ethan had been in that car? What if Margaret hadn't come to borrow it that morning? That's when she understood. Margaret's death wasn't a mistake. She had unknowingly saved Grace's life. Mark still knew nothing. But the hell he had planned for Grace was only just beginning. That night, Grace walked barefoot down the hallway. Her hands were cold. Her eyes were dry from too much crying. Mark was passed out on the sofa. Between his legs was a bottle of tequila. He was still in his funeral suit, shirt unbuttoned, one shoe off. He was snoring. Grace stood over him. There was no love on her face. No hatred either. Only something colder, clarity. The kind that comes when you realize the monster wasn't under your bed, it was lying beside you all along. Grace took one step closer to the sofa. Mark was still asleep, mumbling in his sleep. Most of it was gibberish, but some names slipped through. Vanessa, no. Grace doesn't know. She didn't wake him. She knew he would wake soon. Not in the sunlight, but in the shadow of his own guilt. It had been 3 days since Margaret's death. The car had tumbled down the rocky slope of Ridgeview Canyon. It was a narrow road people usually slowed down on and whispered prayers for safety. It had slammed into a dead tree, one that had outlived every man in town. There were no skid marks. No resistance. Only a scream and then silence. Her body had been pulled from the wreck by 3 passing farm workers. One of them was her own nephew. Since then, everyone who passed that stretch of road made the sign of the cross. The local paper ran the headline: "Elderly woman dies in brake failure accident." Below it was a photo. Grace crying beside the coffin. Mark holding her tightly. But no one else knew. Mark wasn't mourning his mother. He was mourning his shattered plan. That night, Grace sat across from Mark at dinner. The TV was off, but her mind was loud. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why did the brakes fail on the exact day your mom happened to be driving?" Mark didn't look up. He kept stirring his soup in silence. "Old cars fail, Grace. You said it yourself." He muttered. "I took it in last month." Jake checked it. The moment she heard her brother-in-law's name, Mark clenched his jaw. As if even saying it left a bitter taste. "So now it's Jake's fault?" Grace stared at him, unblinking. "Jake told me. Someone cut the brake line." Mark froze. Then finally looked up. His eyes widened, not in denial, not in shock. And then, just barely, a faint smile curled on his lips. The kind of smile you wear when you realize you've been caught. And you're deciding whether to run. Or burn the world down. "Are you accusing me, Grace?" "I'm not accusing. I'm asking." "Me? You think I killed my own mother?" She didn't even blink. "Maybe. Or maybe you just didn't know she'd be the one driving." Mark suddenly stood up, knocking his chair over. "You're insane." "Am I?" Grace's voice never rose. But there was something different in her eyes. Something Mark had never seen before, a hardness. It was the fire of a mother. The gaze of a survivor. Mark froze. Not because he feared being hit, but because he realized he no longer held the power. "Don't talk to me like that, Grace." "Why not?" "I didn't do this. You made it happen." She didn't flinch. "Then you should understand why your mother died in a car that was supposed to be safe. And why Vanessa hasn't shown her face since the funeral." Mark's hand twitched. "Leave Vanessa out of this. If she has nothing to do with it, why does she unsettle you so much?" He didn't answer. He turned, grabbed his coat, and stormed out the front door. The slam was loud enough to wake Ethan. Ethan came down the stairs in his pajamas, clutching a stuffed animal. "Is Daddy mad?" Grace didn't answer. She just held him close. As if trying to protect him not just from the monster, but from the man who was his father. The next morning, Grace visited Jake's garage. She handed him a plastic bag. Inside was a detailed mechanic's report. Jake frowned. "This is more serious than you think." He pointed at the report. The brake line was cut. Clean. Precise. This wasn't wear and tear. This was intentional. Grace nodded slowly. "Can you pull the backyard footage from the night before the accident?" Jake narrowed his eyes. "You're really doing this?" "I've never been more certain." He didn't ask any more questions. He handed her a small USB stick and pulled her into a hug. "If you ever want to leave the house, the cabin's yours." "Thank you," she whispered. "Not yet. But maybe soon." In a dark room, Grace sat for hours in silence, fast-forwarding through endless footage. wearing headphones. Until he appeared. Mark, crouching beside the car in the early morning darkness. A flashlight in his mouth. Tools in his hands. Then Vanessa stepped into the frame. Her hair was down. She wore a red hoodie. Her eyes were sharp, like a stray cat's. She knelt beside him. Their voices were low, but clearly audible. What if something goes wrong? It won't. If the brakes fail on that curve, she won't even realize it. What if the kid's with her? He won't be. She walks him to school. I checked everything. It's perfect. Swear this isn't just for you. Swear it's for us. I swear. I love you. It'll be over soon. And then came the kiss. A long kiss, certain, final. Grace removed her headphones. Her face was calm. But her eyes had changed. She was no longer the grieving wife. She was a woman awakened. The next morning, Grace went to the police station and requested to see the chief. An old man. One who carried more past than patience. I have evidence. He tried to kill me. But someone else died. Here, watch this. She handed him the USB stick. The captain watched the footage in silence. Then he looked at her, not with anger, but with weary eyes. This is solid. No doubt. But we can't use it. It's private property. We'd need a warrant. So there's nothing you can do? Not yet. To arrest him, we need admissible evidence. A confession, a witness, or something that'll stand up in court. Grace left the station empty-handed. But not empty-hearted. If justice wouldn't come to her, she would bring it herself. Just like Mark had. With lies, with charm, with a mask. That night, Grace put on the blue dress. The one Mark once said made her look like a real woman. She curled her hair. Put on makeup. Wore his favorite perfume. She made his favorite dinner. Beef stew and warm cornbread. Soft music played on the radio. Candlelight flickered. Mark came home late. He reeked of cigarettes. And another woman's perfume. He paused at the doorway. What is this supposed to be? Nothing. I just missed you. I don't want to fight anymore. I lost your mother. But I don't want to lose you too. Mark looked at her. He was suspicious. But desire clouds a man's judgment. He sat down. He ate. He laughed. She listened. She held his hand. She spoke of a future she didn't believe in. Of children she didn't want. Of trips they would never take. In her pocket, a small voice recorder blinked red. She was recording everything. That night. In bed, drunk and full. Mark began to talk. It wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know she'd take that damn car? It was supposed to be perfect. It was our chance. And it all fell apart. Grace didn't cry. Instead, she pulled him closer. Coldly. She was no longer preparing to run. She was preparing to destroy him. The next morning, Grace visited an old friend, Karen Simmons. A freelance reporter known for exposing local scandals. Her YouTube channel's followers were rising fast. Grace handed her the recording. Upload it. Make it go viral. Don't use my name. Not yet. Just tell the truth. Karen, always hungry for a story, didn't ask a single question. She edited. She uploaded. Title. Husband plots wife's death, accidentally kills mother instead, a true story from Ridgeview, Texas. 6 hours later, 100,000 views. By the next morning, over 500,000. The entire town was buzzing. In the supermarket aisles, everyone whispered her name. Her face, her pain were everywhere. Mark came home pale as a ghost. He slammed the door and shut off every light in the house. It was you, wasn't it? Grace smiled. What was? The video. You released that video. Which video are you talking about? Everyone hates me now. She slowly stepped closer to him. Or maybe you've always hated yourself. And now everyone's just helping you see it. Mark raised his hand. But stopped. For the first time in his life, he realized he had no power anymore. Grace stepped closer and looked him straight in the eyes. I want our son to know. His mother didn't go down quietly. She stood up and fought back. This is just the beginning, Mark. He backed away and locked himself in the bedroom. He didn't come out for days. Grace took Ethan's hand and spoke gently. Where are we going, Mommy? Someplace new, baby. Someplace where no one has to die because of secrets. She whispered that as she packed a small bag for Ethan. But deep down, she knew. The crash that changed everything wasn't just Margaret's death. It was the moment truth, slammed into a carefully crafted lie. And beyond it, sharper curves still waited. Night fell over Ridgeview like a damp blanket. Mark hadn't stepped out of the room in over 24 hours. The curtains were drawn. The phone was powered off. The TV was muted. In the corner of the screen, his own face appeared on the news. This wasn't a nightmare. It was the sound of reality slowly collapsing. On social media, Mark's name was burning like green wood in fire, wild, loud, and unstoppable. People tore him apart with words sharper than knives. Meanwhile, Grace moved through the house like a soldier preparing for battle. Her hair was tightly bound, each twist woven with resolve. Every step she took was deliberate. Every breath, measured. She knew the monster still breathed under her roof. But she no longer feared it. On the living room floor, Ethan played with a plastic airplane. From time to time, he glanced toward the hallway. He didn't ask about his father. But he knew. Even at his age, he sensed something had broken. That his mother's embrace had changed. That silence was no longer peace. Grace stood by the kitchen window, staring at the lemon tree she had planted with Margaret. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she heard the old woman's voice. Time doesn't erase. It reveals. The tree stood like a quiet altar. The soil still fresh, as if death had stopped there for just a moment. Then, the landline rang. Once. Then silence. Grace picked up the receiver. No voice. 2 minutes later, her cell phone buzzed. A message with no ID. We know what you did. Mark wasn't alone. Keep your mouth shut. A chill ran across Grace's skin. Not from fear. From fury. Someone else was involved. The web was wider. Vanessa? Or someone higher? She walked straight to the bedroom door. 3 sharp knocks. We need to talk. Silence. I'm not here to yell. Not here to blame. I just want answers. The door creaked open. Mark stood there. His cheeks sunken, beard unshaven, eyes hollow like wet ash. He sat on the edge of the bed like a ghost. Grace stepped inside and gently shut the door. I got an anonymous message. They know about the car. They said you weren't alone. Who else is involved? I don't know what you're talking about, Mark muttered. His voice was weak, but steady. Don't play dumb, Mark. You have no allies left. No excuses. Only yourself. If you tell me everything, I might still be able to help you. But if you stay silent, you'll go down alone. Mark stared at his hands, as if they no longer belonged to him. Then he whispered, "There's someone else. He funded it, helped plan it. But I can't give you his name." "Why not?" "Because he can destroy me. Completely. Worse than this." Grace didn't blink. "You're already destroyed, Mark." Mark stood slowly and walked to the closet. He pulled out a shoebox. Inside, envelopes, photos, documents. Grace reached for the top envelope. She opened it. The world tilted. Photos. Mark. Vanessa. And another man. Tall. Dark hair. An air of refinement. A sharp gray suit. She knew that face. Charles Whitmore. One of Ridgeview Clinic's main donors. A respected local philanthropist. A widower. A community hero. Grace's knees trembled. "What does he have to do with this?" Mark's voice was hoarse. "He funded it. He wanted you gone. Not out of love. For business. Your father left you that land. Whitmore wants it for development. If you died, I'd marry Vanessa. Sell the land. He buys it. Legally. Cleanly." Grace stepped back. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to scream. But no sound came. She looked at another photo. Whitmore and Vanessa kissing. Another. Mark signing a contract. This isn't betrayal. It's organized crime. Mark's voice still carried a flicker of arrogance. "You'll never prove it. And if you try, you won't live long enough to regret it." Grace said nothing. She tucked the documents into her coat and walked out without looking back. Moments later, she called Karen. "There's more. A lot more. I need to meet Anne. I need protection." They met at Don Memo's cafe. Karen brought her camera. Grace brought everything. Karen recorded the entire conversation. Grace laid out the photos, emails, and contracts on the table. Karen listened, eyes wide. "This isn't attempted murder," she whispered. "This is a corruption network. It could explode nationwide." "Then let it explode," Grace said. That night, Karen uploaded a new video. Title: "The Businessman Who Tried to Erase a Mother, Grace Miller Breaks Her Silence." Within 4 hours, the video trended across the United States. By the next morning, Mark's name was no longer tied to just attempted murder, but to a corruption network now bearing the full name Charles Whitmore. The next day, Whitmore appeared on a national television program. He claimed everything was fabricated. "Grace is mentally unstable and delusional," he declared. But no one believed him. Then, the threats began. Silent phone calls at midnight. A car with no license plate parked in front of her house. Strange men wandering slowly around her property. Grace took Ethan and brought him to Jake's mountain cabin. But she herself stayed behind, alone. One night, while washing dishes, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, knife in hand. It was Vanessa. Her hair hung loose. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes swollen. Her face unhinged. "I didn't come to hurt you," Vanessa said. "I just need to talk. You don't belong here. I didn't belong by your husband either. But I fell. And he betrayed me too. Are you looking for sympathy?" "No. I want justice." Her voice trembled. "You don't know what he did to me. Or what you did to me. I thought you were the obstacle." But now I see, to him, no one ever mattered. Grace lowered the knife. Vanessa was crying, genuinely crying. Will you testify? Yes. I have emails. Recordings. He thought he could keep me silent with fear. But now I'll use that fear as a weapon. Grace nodded once, quietly. Then come with me. Let's end this. That night, the two of them went to the district attorney's office. They handed over everything. Vanessa read her statement. Emotional, precise, and devastating. At sunrise, Mark was arrested. He didn't resist. He had only one request. Let me see my son. Grace replied. No. Charles Whitmore tried to flee the state under the alias Martin Cuevas. He was caught at the border. His possessions, cash, jewels, and a forged passport. The trial became a media frenzy. Still, Grace never wavered. She spoke with a clear voice, and not a single tear. Vanessa wept throughout her testimony. She described every step of the plan in detail. Mark said nothing. His lawyer pleaded for leniency, citing remorse. But it meant nothing. Mark, 35 years in prison. Whitmore, 42 years in prison. Vanessa, reduced to 5 years for cooperation. The day Grace walked out of the courthouse, the sky was gray. But inside her, something was beginning to rise. Ethan ran toward her. Mommy. That one word felt like the most important thing in the world. She lifted him into her arms and kissed his forehead. Is it over now, Mommy? Not yet, baby. But the worst part is. That night, while Ethan slept beside her, Grace wrote in her notebook. I never asked for this battle. But I faced it. I wasn't searching for truth. But I brought it into the light. These wounds didn't kill me. They made me strong. She lit a candle beneath the orange tree. Not for Mark. Not for Whitmore. For Margaret. And for every woman who lost her life before she could tell her story. In the soft breath of dawn, she made a vow. As long as I am alive, no one else will die in silence. The candlelight still flickered. As morning light began to gently touch the cabin windows, Grace hadn't slept. An open notebook rested on her lap. A pen in her hand. But she wrote nothing more. She was remembering. Calculating. Planning. This wasn't victory. It was the stillness after a storm. When the ground is still wet from too much pain. Ethan slept beside her, curled up like a kitten. Sometimes he mumbled in his sleep. Words that blended warmth and fear, his mother's touch and some unnamed dread. His heart was still innocent. He still believed that everything could be fixed with a kiss. Grace envied him. Wished she could still believe like that. Mark's arrest stayed in the headlines for days. His face was all over the TV. Monster. Betrayer. A manipulator. But another face began to emerge, Vanessa's. Her involvement divided opinion. Some called her a victim. Others, a remorseful accomplice. Grace herself wasn't sure. Some nights, she dreamed of choking her. Other times, she remembered the way she collapsed in tears before the DA. Maybe both were true. Maybe Vanessa was torn. Or maybe, she was just a better liar. 3 weeks after the trial, Grace decided to leave town for a while. Not to run. Not out of fear. To understand. To step away from the noise. And begin healing from within. Jake lent her an old pickup truck. Grace placed Ethan in the passenger seat. And turned the wheel toward the Texas countryside. To the ranch where her mother was born. The road was long and winding. But she didn't mind. The curves reminded her that life was never meant to be straight. Eventually, she reached a village no one talked about anymore. Abandoned by the government. But faith still lived there. Adobe houses. Tin roofs. Barefoot children laughing brighter than polished shoes. They were welcomed by Dona Faustina, her mother's distant cousin. Her movements were slow, but her eyes sparkled. Her hands were strong, and her honesty could sometimes strike like a hammer. "You're the woman from the news, ain't you?" she said, spooning hot beef stew into a bowl. "I am," Grace replied. There was no pride in her voice. "But that's not why I'm here. I still don't understand something." "What don't you understand?" "How can a man plan to kill the woman he sleeps beside and still sleep peacefully?" Dona Faustina stared at her spoon. Then, like confessing a sin, she whispered, "When the devil loves you, he wears an angel's face. And when you're afraid to be alone, you let him in." Grace didn't respond. The words sank into her chest, like a stone dropped into still water. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on a wicker chair outside, beneath the stars. Ethan slept inside, wrapped in blankets. Above her, the sky whispered in a language older than sorrow. Then, she heard a cough. Not Ethan's. An old cough. Familiar in a way she couldn't explain. She turned around. No one was there. But the unease remained, echoing softly in her chest. At dawn, Grace walked to the village cemetery. Beneath a wooden cross lay her grandmother, Teresa. She knelt quietly before the grave. Did any of this mean something? The fear, the anger, the pain. She heard grass rustle behind her. A girl, about 8 years old, stood there. Her hair was messy, her clothes slightly dirty, but her posture was straight. "Are you Grace?" the girl asked. "Yes, I am. My mom said you're the one who stopped the bad man. And now you help people. Is that true?" Grace took a breath. "I don't know if I won. But I survived. And now I want to help someone else." Tears welled in the girl's eyes. "My mom cries at night. She says she gets in trouble if she screams. Can you help her?" Grace gently pulled the girl into an embrace. She didn't need permission. That child had spoken the truth so many women couldn't voice. That night, Grace visited the village priest. "I want to gather the women. The ones still hurting." The priest hesitated, then quietly nodded. 3 days later, Grace was listening to countless untold stories. Women who had lost family. Women who had sacrificed themselves to survive. Girls who had carried secrets since childhood. Each story weighed heavy on Grace's heart. But at the same time, it fed the fire inside her. She started a small support group. They called themselves Margaret's Daughters. Women who didn't know how to read, but knew how to love. Women who had never spoken up, but now could say, "It ends here." Grace taught the basics. Their rights. How to stay safe. How to ask for help. And how to survive. They cried together. Sometimes laughed. Slowly, they rebuilt trust. Brick by brick. One day, Karen called. Her YouTube channel had exploded. Grace's video had surpassed 5 million views. Women's organizations were reaching out. International media wanted interviews. "Are you ready?" Karen asked. Grace smiled. "Not yet. Not until girls like the one in that cemetery stop appearing." In Ethan's dreams, fear and his mother's warmth still tangled together. In his innocence, he still believed that a kiss could fix everything. Grace wished, just once more, she could believe that too. 3 months later, Grace and Karen founded Margaret House. Ethan had changed too. He no longer woke up screaming. He no longer drew burning houses. Now, he drew trees, animals, and smiles. One night, Ethan asked Grace, "Is Daddy coming back?" "No, my love. He's not coming back." "What if he does?" Grace smiled gently. "By then, you'll be a strong young man. And you'll know how to protect yourself. And you, Mommy. I've already learned." In the months that followed, Grace, along with Karen and a few supporters, opened a small office in a nearby town. They called it Margaret House as well. A shelter for women who chose to live. There was no luxury. But there was undeniable dignity. Meals. Beds. Legal support. Therapy. One afternoon, while Grace was handing out bread as usual, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was Vanessa. Her hair was cut short. Her face was clear. No makeup. She looked like a different person. "Can we talk?" "You already did. In court. Not as an accomplice. Not as a traitor. As a woman." Grace led Vanessa out to the backyard. They sat beneath a tree. "I've been in therapy. There's a support program in prison. I tried it. And I finally understood. I didn't love Mark. I just loved the way he made me feel needed. That wasn't love. Not really. Now I see that. What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I just wanted to say thank you. Because you were brave. I didn't stay lost inside him forever. I didn't do it for you. I know. But still. I was saved." She handed Grace a letter. "From my mother. She died of cancer last year. This was all she left me. I only just found the strength to read it." Grace opened the letter and read quietly. "To my daughter. Never let a man convince you that you have no worth. You are light. You are fire. And if anyone tries to dim that shine, walk away without hesitation. Life is too short to live in the shadows." That night, Grace wrote in her notebook, "Secrets bleed. But if you wash them early, they won't rot." And in that moment, she understood. Her mission was only just beginning. That night, the rain began to fall. Not hard, but softly. As if whispering, "I see you." Grace closed the notebook, tucked it into the old wooden box her mother once used, and walked to the window. Outside, guava leaves swayed gently. The smell of wet earth drifted in, reminding her of childhood. Back when life didn't hurt so much. Or hurt in a different way. Ethan was fast asleep beside her. A flashlight still on beside his pillow. As if he still feared the monsters under his bed. But Grace. She now knew the truth. The real monster doesn't live under the bed. He walks tall. Wears cologne. Smiles at the family table. Whispers, "I love you." And all the while, he's planning to erase you. Grace gently pulled Ethan's blanket over him. She kissed his cheek. Meanwhile, at the medium security prison, Mark paced in his cell. Barefoot. Swollen eyes. No letters. No visitors. The name that once held power. Now only spoken in disgusted whispers. He was thin. Empty. He mumbled to himself. The guards always heard the same name. Margaret. At first, he dreamed of appeals. Of clearing his name. But once truth is exposed, It never goes silent again. As days passed, he began to break. Insomnia came first. Then tremors. And then, the voices. They started in dreams. Margaret stood before him, covered in dirt, eyes open, mouth sewn shut. She said nothing, just stared. Soon, he began seeing her while awake. In the far corner of the cafeteria. In the mirror. Every blink. There she was. He blamed it on the prison. On guilt. But deep down, he knew. She was really there. You killed me, she whispered one night beside his bed. Mark screamed, begged, cried for her to leave. But the more he screamed, the clearer she became. Eventually, her voice whispered right into his ear. I gave you life, and you gave me death. Other inmates began avoiding him. They started calling him the madman in Block 5. One inmate claimed Mark spoke in tongues at night. Another said his hands were covered in blood while he slept. The guards stopped asking questions. They just left him alone. One early morning, Mark walked to the sink in his cell. He stared into the cracked mirror. She was there. Not the mother who cooled his soup. Someone else. Eyes dark. Face unmoving. The face of a woman who had decided, no more forgiveness. He collapsed. Cried harder than he had in years. I didn't know you'd take the car. It wasn't meant for you. But she vanished. Without a word. That morning, Mark asked for paper. With shaking hands. He wrote a short letter. Just 12 lines. No name. No address. Words to the void. There was no forgiveness. But his breath came easier. That night, he tore a sheet. Braided it. Tied it to the bars. He stood on the toilet. Closed his eyes. Not from fear. From shame. Just before the end, he heard a lullaby. His mother's voice. Soft as wind. Sleep now, my child. Rest, my beloved. He let go. And silence followed. The next day, the news reached Grace. It was Teresa who told her. Grace was in the shelter's dining hall, reviewing intake forms for new arrivals. Her face didn't move. Only her hand stopped. Do you want to be alone? Teresa asked. No, Grace replied softly. I want to see my son. Ethan was drawing a field of flowers. When Grace entered, he beamed. Mommy. Look. I drew lots of suns. You said the sun always comes after the storm. Grace hugged him tightly. That's right, sweetheart. Today, the sun came out. She didn't tell him his father was gone. She didn't want to stain him with hate. Grace had made a vow. She would end the cycle. That night, she opened the old wooden box. She reread everything. From the first line after Margaret's death, to the last note about the women of Margaret House. She decided to publish it. Not for revenge. For testimony. She sent it to a small publishing house that valued women's voices. 4 months later, the book was released. The day fate hit the brakes. It wasn't read because it was perfect. It was read because it was honest. Women cried as they read. Men shifted uncomfortably. Some stayed silent. Others finally spoke. Grace was invited to speak at colleges, churches, women's forums. Not for fame. For truth. She always brought Ethan. She always told Margaret's story. At one event, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. Thank you. Because of you, I got out. And I'm still here. Grace took her hand. Don't thank me. If you must thank someone, thank the part of you that's still alive inside you. The following year, the government officially recognized Margaret House. New shelters opened in other states. Grace received awards. But her greatest reward? Watching women leave her shelter with their heads held high. One night, she received a letter. No return address. Neat handwriting. I saw your interview. I'm in another country now. I've started over. I don't ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. But because of you, I stopped being a shadow. I'm a mother now. And I promise, I will never be who I was. Vanessa. Grace folded the letter. Placed it in the box. Closed the lid. Looked to the sky. You see, Margaret? It was worth it. Under the orange tree, a purple ribbon danced in the breeze. An altar stood nearby. A photo of Margaret. Fresh flowers. Candles glowing in the dusk. A plaque read, "For those who are gone. And those we refuse to lose." Grace knelt. Placed her hand on the earth. You can rest now, Margaret. Your death wasn't in vain. It changed the world. Even just a little piece of it. The wind passed softly through. And if you listened closely, you might have heard a voice. That's all I ever hoped for. That's all I ever wanted.